All right, good morning. Welcome. My name is Mr. Mack. We got Miss Pickett, and we have our guest today, Miss Hopkins. Dominique, sorry. So tell us what you do. Like, what is your job title, and like, what is your job description?
Sure. So I'm a research assistant professor at Northwestern University Feinberg School of Medicine. And with that position, I typically do research on whatever interests me within my department. So I'm in the Department of Physical Medicine and Rehabilitation. And my specialty is focusing on ways to promote physical activity and exercise for people who have chronic conditions like lupus and multiple sclerosis.
Well, that's pretty fascinating. Wow. So you said in whatever it is that the department is in, how long have you been doing that?
Yeah, so I started with the department in October of 2019. So the reason I say it in that way is that, each department is a collection of different researchers. And so we all have our specific research interests. So my doctorate is in kinesiology, which is the study of human movement. And how I have learned to incorporate that into my research is through a biobehavioral lens, which means that I'm interested in what motivates people to maintain physical activity or to get started in physical activity and exercise. And we've learned that that's a way that really helps manage certain diseases. And so that's my specific focus.
Look, as a side note, for a person who's trying to motivate herself to go to the gym today, what does some of that look like? Just even for, again, from that research lens, what does that even look like? Motivation to work out.
Yeah, so there's a lot of literature out there on habit building and the best way to incorporate new habits. And so the lens that I look through is called social cognitive theory, and this psychological lens that tries to look at different variables that typically are associated with an uptake in behavior. And so for social cognitive theory, that's including goal setting, so being really clear about your goals and setting smart goals, planning, so actually setting in your schedule, at this time I'm going to do this, instead of saying, oh, at some point, this week I'll get there. Having that concrete plan really helps. Being really aware of what you're hoping to achieve from it, so identifying your outcome expectations. If I exercise, I expect to experience, to be happier, to decrease depression, or to feel stronger. And so all of those different things that may, in a sense, motivate you to want to do the behavior, really clearly outlining those. And then also being aware of what are the barriers and facilitators to that. So if you have a friend who, you could check in with, I have my accountability partner. Every day we say what we did towards our goals. And that's a good way to keep you on track. And then also to be aware of, if I have a birthday party this week, I'm probably going to smash a lot of cake and, do whatever it is that I want to do. And accept that and find ways to incorporate ways to enjoy what sometimes are contradicting habits.
So let me ask you this. So
Yeah.
how does it look? So dealing with patients that, like you said, do have lupus or any other like conditions, how is it different when dealing with those types of patients?
Yeah, so my specialty is multiple sclerosis, and I've more recently, within the last 2 years, started working within lupus. And so, what's really important to pay attention to with different chronic conditions is you don't want to exacerbate a flare up, and so you don't want to, specifically for multiple sclerosis, something that can help or that can encourage a flare up of your disease is increased body temperature, heat. Some people are, they notice that they have exacerbations at the same time that, temperatures are rising. And so with keeping core temperature at a good level, you want to make sure you're aware of that. But in general, it's just being aware of what any impairments that you might have. So again, with MS, a lot of the manifestations of the disease are physical. And so if you notice that your walking is impaired, you want to make sure that you're not trying to do something that would put you at risk for injury. And so really starting slowly and working on incremental increases in behavior, that was really helpful when you think about physical activity for people with different conditions. You just want to make sure you're encouraging positive things and helping the disease, not necessarily causing it to get worse. So there's a fine line, and it's really good to work with professionals. But physical activity and exercise is one of the best things you can do to slow down the progression of MS. So it's definitely great to do.
Nice. Oh, go ahead, Steph.
No, I'm just, again, you get to listen to this, right? You get to talk to her about these things. I'm just absolutely fascinated. I mean, one of the things that has been really, really cool about doing this career series is, even for myself, the same way we're trying to expose it to students, is hearing about these different branches of career. Like, we have this whole idea, and then how it is that it branches out into these very specific niches. And that makes me even ask you, what made you choose this career? What made you
Yeah,
choose this?
that's a great question. If you would have asked 10-year-old Dominique what she wanted to be, this student didn't even know this job existed. I think that that's one of the biggest things for me, is that I really allowed myself to explore my interests. And so as soon as I found something that I maybe thought was interesting, I just tried to find programs that would let me experience it to find out if I really liked it or I didn't. And so within the pathway to this career, I um, decided to go to college for economics because I had an AP economics teacher and I thought he was awesome and I thought the work that he did was great. And then I got to college and I started taking, some of the mathematic courses, and I realized, you know what, maybe this isn't for me. And so I switched my major and I decided to go into psychology, which, is interesting because for me, I always was interested in understanding, the mind and why we do things and how to help people heal from, different experiences in their lives. So I thought, that's another interest of mine. Maybe I'll go that way. Um, and I was recommended by a friend. She said, if you're interested in going to graduate school, because if to be a psychologist, you need to get, your master's. She said that you should do some research and you should get some experience for research. It'd be great on your resume. And I said, what are you talking about? I had no idea that people could volunteer as an undergrad and do research, that you could get involved with some of the work that professors were doing. And it just so happened the next week I was in an exercise psychology course, and the instructor for that course advertised. He said, hey, I'm looking for undergraduate research assistants. If you're interested in doing research, come join us. And his research was all on exercise and multiple sclerosis. And so that's really how I was exposed to the field. He is one of the best researchers, Dr. Robert Model, regarding physical activity and exercise for multiple sclerosis. He's done some amazing work. And what I learned during that year of volunteering was that physical activity and exercise was really a way to put the power back into our participants' hands. When you're given a life-changing diagnosis like multiple sclerosis, there's a lot of identity shifting and really understanding that your body is going to function perhaps differently than it used to. And with physical activity and exercise, you're able to feel the strength rebuild. And it was just an amazing thing to witness. And I was asked if I wanted to stay on for my doctorate. And so I said, absolutely, I'd love to. And doing that and staying, I went from my bachelor's to a PhD program. I did not get a master's. And that's something that also I wasn't aware of before getting into graduate level education, is that you don't always have to get a master's degree to get your PhD. And so you should look into programs that maybe would help expedite you into the job field or job force if that's something you're interested in. So that's kind of how I got to the research area of physical activity and exercise with MS.
Can you speak on, just because my students don't really know what research is, can you just kind of
Yeah.
speak on what exactly is research, or kind of like a couple examples of like, things that you do while like doing research?
Absolutely. So really we do research every day. It's, you're deciding what TV show to watch. And so you go on the TV guide and you're like, looking at every different option that's available. That in and of itself is doing research towards what you're looking for. And so when you think about it, all of us, kids included, are doing research at every moment. What it is for me in our basic sense is that you have a question and it's something that you don't know the answer to, or you have a lot of different ideas of what the answer could be. And so you try to hypothesize, is what it's called. Think of what the answer to that question would be. So, for example, you know, is physical activity good for me to do? Well, you could say yes, but then if you do physical activity, you could realize, well, the next day I'm really sore. I don't feel so good. I was exhausted after I did that activity. So that it could be good, it could be bad, it could be both. And so doing research would be to explore that question and to test out the different hypotheses. And so to test out the different answers that you're thinking of. That's a good question. I have not thought about the best way to break down, what is research. And so it really is having a question, thinking of answers, and exploring those answers.
I feel like research is one of those words that like it's hard to define it without saying the word
I
research.
know I'm the worst at that in general.
There's a few words like that. So what? Okay, so I know you said that like you got your doctorate. What was like? Was there anything else in between with that? Like, did you have to do an internship or practicum? Like, what was the length of time for the schooling?
Yeah, so I kind of had a non-traditional course. So the way that I got into my job was not typically how people do it. And I would encourage you to explore ways that work for you, even if it's not what the path is in front of you. A lot of people say do A, then B, then C. Sometimes you could just go from A to C and that's good enough. It depends on what you're looking for. So there weren't any internships that I did or practicum. I did do that 1 year of volunteer research experience, which allowed me to make the connections to then get my PhD in the same research laboratory that I did the experience in. I will say though, before I got into my career, I decided to do a postdoctoral fellowship. And what a postdoctoral fellowship is an additional training that you can do in a field that's very, specific to your interests. And this is a little bit of a mouthful, but when I was doing research during grad school to get my doctorate, I noticed that, I was in central Illinois, there was not a large Black population, but new research had come out to say that multiple sclerosis has a 47% increased likelihood of happening in people who are Black. And as a Black woman, this was really interesting to me. I had never thought of multiple sclerosis as something that, was really common in our race. And so with that, I said, we've not done a lot of research with this population, with the people who are Black, and I think we should do more research there. And so that's really what my research started focusing on. And what I learned is that there are a lot of other variables and a lot of other things to think about when you're managing a healthcare diagnosis like multiple sclerosis. And I wanted to better understand the healthcare system and how people manage their care. What doctors did they see? How often did they see them? Is it different for certain people? And so I decided to do a postdoctoral fellowship at Northwestern in health services and outcomes research. And health services and outcomes research is really understanding the different health services and how people utilize them. And then outcomes research is understanding, for my physical activity interventions, an outcome is what we're looking to see happen at the end. And so if I want someone to engage in physical activity, and then I hope that that helps them increase their walking ability, or I hope that helps them decrease their depression or their anxiety or their fatigue, how tired they may be, then those are outcomes I'm looking at. So it helps me really understand how to study both of those things. And so that was an additional 2 years of training that I did before I got my job as a research assistant professor. Something that I realized though is I didn't explain what multiple sclerosis is in case people aren't familiar with that. Because I've been saying the word a lot, but multiple sclerosis, often referred to as MS, is a very common neurological disease of the central nervous system, which is a fancy way of saying it's a chronic disease that stays with you from the moment you have it for the rest of your life. And there are different ways that the disease progresses in our bodies, and there are two ones that are the most common is called relapsing remitting MS. And that means that there are periods of stability, and then you might have what I've referred to as an exacerbation, so an increase in your symptoms. As it resolves, you go down to sometimes what's referred to as a new normal, or you can recover, completely. And that pattern just keeps going over time. Or you have primary progressive, which is always steadily increasing with, different spikes of exacerbations over time. So just I wanted to give that little info because I realize I'm saying this and not everybody is familiar with it. Oh, sorry, you're muted.
Macri,
Oh,
why not, right? But no, first of all, thank you for defining that. I will say that because when you did mention it, I was like, okay, I have to put this on the flyer, and then I've Googled. I'm like, all right, of course, familiarity with a little bit of familiarity, but then again, not knowing all the different details that entails as well.
yeah.
But that brings me to the thinking about, again, you've gotten into a very specific field, you've done it in a way where it is that, like you said, and I love how you put that, where it's okay, just because they say ABC doesn't mean that you can't go from A to C and you can't choose your own path and go through your own set of experiences. But I also love how you alluded to the fact that you're like 10-year-old me wasn't even interested in something like that, just dealing with life. So what kinds of, like, if we could link this together, even thinking about students, right? What kinds of qualities do you feel like you have or had, like, that you've had over your life, that have led you into this, that makes you good at this job or good for this career field?
Yeah, that's a great question. And it is funny to think about all the ideas. There are two things that I would say have contributed to this is that I've always been a naturally, curious kid. My nickname with my family is Birdie. They said I was a question bird. I always had to ask questions. I was never satisfied with an answer. I really needed to understand things. So I think that really lends itself. I never would have drawn that conclusion that I'd be a researcher whose job is really to explore answers to questions for a living. But that's a natural link that I see. I think also I was really fortunate. I applied for, it's called the Collegiate Scholars Program, and it's at the University of Chicago when I was in high school. And so it starts, at 14 years old. And there, that experience allowed you to take some courses with college professors. And it allowed you to get some internship experience with Goldman Sachs. And there were all of these different interests that I had. I mentioned that I really just wanted, if I had an idea, I wanted to explore it. And this program really helped facilitate me being able to test the waters out to figure out, okay, I like the idea of being an entrepreneur, but I also like structure. And so maybe, an entrepreneurship job isn't for me. And I want something that's a little bit more structured, but allows for freedom to explore the many questions that I had. And so I think I wasn't afraid to try anything that interested me. We often can be afraid of our ideas. They really are big in our head, and you might think, I'm not capable of doing that, or that's not something that I've ever seen someone who looks like me do, so I can't do that. And you don't want to be the person to tell no. Let the world figure out where push your boundaries. There's really not a lot that you can't do. And that was an attitude I think I've always had, of just really putting myself out there. And if it went well, awesome. If it didn't go well, I hope I learned something and kept moving. And I think that that's really important for kids to think about, is what are you telling yourself no to before you actually find out that it's a no. You really should take the time to explore anything you can that you're interested in.
So what would you say a typical day looks like for work? Like, so from, the time you get up to the time you get off of work, like, what is it, like, I guess, a typical day look like?
That's so funny because there isn't really a typical day within my field. And that's something that I love about it, is the variety of, experiences. I would say on average, a day includes the following, always got to check a bunch of emails because research never sleeps and you have to think about the projects you have going on. So right now I have three different research projects that I'm focused on. And so the first is a home-based exercise program for people who have lupus that I'm currently in the design phase for, and seeking approvals to be able to start the intervention. An intervention is the study that we're testing out. So that question that I have, will participating in a 4-month exercise program help people with lupus decrease their fatigue levels? Now I'm developing the study so that we can actually test that question. And so right now that's all designing and working with different researchers to figure out the best way to develop this program that we want to test. Another study that I'm looking at that I work on daily is it's a healthcare utilization study. And so this is to answer more of that question is, do people who live in different parts of Chicago utilize the healthcare system differently? So do they go to the doctor at different frequencies? Do they go to the ER more frequently? Do they have experience with physical therapists and occupational therapists, which are different specialties and doctors you can see that are helpful for your disease, but not everyone has the ability to access these doctors. And so I'm really trying to figure out where are the gaps and how people who are in really, affluent, very rich, very prosperous neighborhoods, how is that different from people who live in more distressed communities? So that way we know what communities need our attention in our research efforts, and to go into those communities and help them with their disease. And then the last project that I'm working with is another home-based, a home-based exercise program for lupus. And so that one involves a lot of meetings and making sure that, we're talking to our participants frequently and keeping them on track with the study. And a typical day for me is emails, working on those 3 projects, writing papers to publish the results of those projects, and writing grants to get money to do new research projects.
I just want to say, just to remind me to talk about this, like once we're after the call, like later sometime. I
Okay.
have some family that has lupus. So I would definitely be interested to see, just, learn some things and stuff from them. So
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely.
uh,
Anything.
and then the next thing I was gonna say, so a lot of people have jobs where it's difficult not to, I guess, work past like your off time, right? So like with me and Stephanie, we get off at a certain time, but there's often where we have parents that call us later. We might have students that message or text us later on, right? So
Yeah.
how what do you do, I guess, I guess separate, work from home, or to kind of do self-care for yourself?
Yeah. So, I have I grew up with a mom who worked a lot. And so I always saw her working her tail off. And when she got to enjoy her life, she loved it. But it was really kind of eye opening for me as a kid. I said I always wanted to have really good boundaries. You work so that you can have a life, you don't live your life so that you can work. And so I think that mindset was really important for me to create. Um, Areas in my life where that are just for me, so that my life doesn't become just my work. I love what I do. I am proud of what I do. It is a job at the end of the day. And so it's really important that, the family that you have, the life that you're building is the number one priority. So I think that mindset has always helped. But even with that, that's on the best days, right? There are nights where I'm working 16-hour days just because things are due and things need to get done. You really have to kind of try and balance that the best that you can. Um, can you remind me of the second part of your question?
It was just basically like, what do you do for like self-care?
Yeah. So then for self-care, I try and get into my hobbies. Over the pandemic and during quarantine, I got back into quilting, which is something that my grandmothers have taught me. And so that was a really fun way to kind of have some creative expression. I also am training for a 300-mile adventure race in October, and that takes quite a lot of time to kind of build up for that. And so that's a 4-day race of hiking and biking and kayaking and running. So I'm trying to get into the best shape for that so that I can, be prepared and not just be laid out somewhere on the side of the road during the race. So those are probably the two things that I do currently. I also blessed I have a 10-year-old little sister, so I get to go to a lot of her baseball and basketball games to just spend some time with family. So that's been good.
That is so awesome. Just so just so incredibly cool. Um, One of the things too, you just mentioned you were talking about the pandemic, and I'm curious how has the pandemic affected, like your research or your job as a whole?
Yeah, it rocked it. That's for sure. I'm so grateful that I was able to keep my job during the pandemic, and be able to transition to work remotely. That was definitely difficult, but as an a time in my life I'm really grateful for. Um, for us, all research was halted. And so the research that I do is with other humans and with people, and it wasn't safe for people to be around each other, right? So it was really important for us to figure out ways to change we call it our protocol, which is just really the way that we do our projects to protect people's safety. And so following different guidance, as soon as some of the restrictions were lifted, how can we safely bring people in for their visits? How can we make sure that everyone is being safe at home and help them get in touch with their doctors to get the vaccine as soon as they were willing and able to. And so with us, it really put everything in a halt for a while. We weren't able to do any research, and then slowly we are able to rebuild. And so right now I'd say that we're in that rebuilding phase now that things are kind of open again. But it was very difficult, and it was a lot of shifting from in person and research that we did with other people to writing manuscripts and writing new grants. Manuscripts are what we call articles that we eventually publish, but in the writing phase, that's our manuscript. And so it's really just taking the time to fine tune our research, get it out to other people, and then be able to think of new projects that would come later on.
So I know you obviously talked a lot about research, but I also know that you like teach too. So could you
Yeah.
talk a little bit about like speak a little bit on that?
Well, so right now with my position at Northwestern, I don't teach too much. I do some guest lecturing, but this fall I will be transitioning to position at the University of Michigan as a professor, or assistant professor in the School of Kinesiology. And there I will get to teach. And so I'm really excited. Part of what drew me to this career was the idea of being able to be working with students and being able to help them find their research voice and to help them figure out what career path they wanted to take. So right now the teaching that I do is guest lecturing for a few colleagues. I love it. I can't wait till I get to do it every week. But yeah, not there yet, almost.
And then do you have like I guess like a down the road plan? Like, is this what you want to do for the next, I don't know, whatever, 20 years? Or is there another step that you want to, or another goal that you want to accomplish where you want to get to?
Yeah, I think it's important not to get too like just if I was giving advice to not to think too much about some sort of rigid plan. Like I said, I didn't even know this career existed. I didn't know I could be a research professor. I didn't really think of myself as ever being a professor at this level. So I try not to have too many like really fine goals that I can't separate myself from. But in general, yes, I'd love to do what I'm doing. Within my position, there's uh, a roadmap of how you become a tenured professor. And so I'll be an assistant professor for about 7 to 8 years as I'm building up my research and, showing that and demonstrating that I, can come up with great ideas. I can execute them well. I can get outside funding to support the ideas that I have, and I can publish those findings, and it can help change people's lives. At that point, then I'm reviewed by my colleagues and promoted to associate professor. And so at that level, it just pretty much says that you've kind of made a national or international name for yourself. When people think of physical activity and exercise for multiple sclerosis, specifically in Black communities, they will hopefully know that I'm a researcher in that area. And so that kind of is something that I'm looking forward to in the next phase of my career. And then, after a certain amount of time, I'll be reassessed by my colleagues to be promoted to full professor. And so those 3 promotions are kind of in my tunnel vision. Just with the new track that I've taken, starting this new role, that's kind of the next 3 steps. But after that, I would love to, get into some administration. I think eventually, looking at positions, if I'm exploring whether or not I'd want to be a dean or an associate dean to faculty or to undergrads. Those things I'm not as familiar with and need to learn a little bit more. So eventually, that might be something that I explore.
So just, I mean, again, with all this, with any other, I love how it is that there's been a couple of main themes in here, just in your journey. Like not having things be just too tight fitting, where it is that you don't feel like your dream can expand however it needs to, and continuing to persevere, right? Try new things, give yourself opportunities to try new things. But any other advice that you would give, students or people who are interested in, and I want to just maybe focus it more on just research, like having that curious mind. Any advice that you would give to middle school children, saying like, okay, hey, this is what you might want to focus on. Any other advice you might want to give them?
Yeah, definitely. When I think of middle school and, I think of my sister, she's 10. And or yeah, she'll be 11 soon. I think of the conversations that I've had to encourage her to not have any limits on what she can do. I touched on that before, but I really think it's important to feel that deep down that you are going to be your biggest limiting factor your whole life. And so let yourself dream big because you are capable of it. Um, I would say that regarding research specifically, when you start getting into looking at different summer programs or things within schools, if you have a science teacher, ask them if they can talk to you about how they got to their career. One of the best things I ever did was I just sent emails to people who I thought had really cool jobs. And I asked if they would meet with me because I wanted to learn more of what they did. And so I did that growing up, but I especially did that once I started to get the idea that I wanted to be a professor. So if there's a job that you think you want one day or something you're just really interested in, don't be afraid to ask your parents or ask someone at your school to help you find someone who has that job so that you can learn from them. I would say, that goes with the whole idea of being really curious, but don't just be curious, do something about it. Think about how you can get more information and then, see if that's something that you'd like to do down the line. Also, when you do get to college and you think about going to graduate school, get involved in research. You'll never know the connections you could make. I got my PhD fully funded, which is not something that I ever thought I could get. And that was in large part because I volunteered that first year and made the connection so that I could, teach and do research to pay my way through school. And so I would just say long term, make sure that you get involved in research, even if you're just thinking maybe I'd want to go to grad school. It's really important.
Any last questions, Steph?
No, just thank you. That was awesome. Thank you for the words of wisdom, and then just the focus on continuing to persevere and look into and explore your options. And it is even from a researcher's perspective too. Like, you have the question, go find an answer and be action oriented about it. And I think that'll ring really true with our middle schoolers and just the time period that they're in. So thank you for today and all of the different words of encouragement, as well as breaking down what it is that you do. And it's amazing. I'm like, I didn't even know that was a thing. So thank you for today.
No, thank you so much. And honestly, if you have any students that are interested, I'm very happy. You can feel free to give them any of my information. I'd love to stay in contact and connect with them. I really do appreciate what you guys are doing. I think this is a phenomenal, um, you know, way to bring people in of different careers and have that exposure. So I'm happy to be included.